The laughter started the moment Diane Martinez stepped out of the fitting room. Sharp, cutting laughter that echoed off the mirrored walls of Whitmore's bridal boutique, the kind that makes your skin burn and your throat close. She stood there in the ivory silk gown, her calloused waitress hands trembling against the delicate fabric, while three women in tennis whites pointed and whispered behind manicured fingers. For a single mother trying to give her daughter one perfect memory, this May afternoon in 1979 was supposed to feel like hope. Instead, it felt like drowning. Before we go any further, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Drop a comment below, and if this story moves you, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. The boutique smelled like expensive perfume and fresh gardenias, a scent so thick it felt like breathing through silk. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across cream carpeting that showed every footprint, every sign that someone like Diane didn't belong. The dress she wore, a simple A-line with lace sleeves, had been marked down 3 times because the original bride had abandoned it after finding a stain near the hem. Diane had saved for 7 months to afford even this damaged gown. 7 months of double shifts at the Route 66 diner, serving truckers and tourists, while her 5-year-old daughter Amy colored quietly in the corner booth. "I'm sorry, but I don't think we can accommodate you." Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore materialized like a perfumed ghost, her silver hair lacquered into an immovable helmet. She was the kind of woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and measured worth in country club memberships. "That dress requires alterations we simply can't provide in your price range." Diane's face burned. "I can pay for alterations. I'm sure you do, dear." Mrs. Whitmore's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "But honestly, wouldn't you be more comfortable at one of the shops downtown? This boutique caters to a very specific clientele." Translation: "You don't belong here." The tennis white women tittered again. One of them, a blonde with a diamond tennis bracelet that probably cost more than Diane's car, stage whispered to her friend, "Can you imagine? Trying on a designer gown with those hands. She'll snag the fabric." Diane looked down at her hands. Rough, red from dish soap and hot water, hands that had changed 1,000 diapers, braided her daughter's hair, held Amy through nightmares about the daddy who'd left before she could walk. Hands that worked. She should leave. She should peel off this dress that suddenly felt like a costume, gather what remained of her dignity, and walk out. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of Amy's face that morning, solemn and bright-eyed, saying, "Mama, you're gonna be the prettiest bride ever." Maybe it was 7 months of split fingernails and aching feet. Maybe it was just exhaustion. "I'd like to purchase this dress," Diane said quietly. "I have cash." Mrs. Whitmore's expression curdled. "That dress is $450, plus alterations." "I have $500. For a moment, something like panic flashed across Mrs. Whitmore's face. She hadn't expected Diane to actually have the money, but she recovered quickly, her mouth twisting into something cruel. "I'm terribly sorry, but that particular gown has already been reserved for another client. I forgot to remove it from the floor." It was a lie. They both knew it. The dress had a clearance tag safety pinned to the inside seam. "Then I'll wait for another dress in my size." "We don't have anything in your size." Another lie. Diane had seen 3 others before selecting this one. The blonde woman laughed openly now. "Honey, take a hint." Diane felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, She'd survived too much for that. But crack, a fissure that let in all the shame and anger she normally kept locked away. She was 19 when Amy was born, 20 when her boyfriend vanished, 24 now and still fighting for scraps of dignity in a world that looked at single mothers like mistakes. She turned toward the fitting room to change, blinking hard against tears she refused to let fall in front of these women. "Excuse me." The voice came from near the entrance, deep and measured with an accent Diane couldn't quite place. "I couldn't help but overhear. How much for the dress the young lady is wearing?" Diane turned. The man standing in the boutique's doorway looked as out of place as she felt, though for different reasons. He was Asian, probably in his mid-40s, wearing an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that whispered money in a way Mrs. Whitmore would recognize instantly. His eyes were kind, but carried the weight of someone who'd seen both sides of fortune. Mrs. Whitmore's demeanor transformed like someone had flipped a switch. "Oh, sir, the dress is $450, the man said, pulling out a leather wallet. "Plus alterations, I heard. Let's call it $600 to cover everything. I'll pay cash." The boutique went silent except for the whisper of the air conditioning. Diane found her voice. "Sir, I can't let you." He held up one hand, and something in his expression stopped her protest. "Please, consider it a wedding gift from a stranger who knows what it's like to need kindness when the world offers none." Mrs. Whitmore sputtered, caught between greed and her obvious disdain. The cash won. It always did. But as the man counted out $100 bills with steady hands, Diane noticed something that made her breath catch. On his left ring finger, faded but visible, was a thin scar in the shape of a crescent moon. She knew that scar. She'd watched it heal 7 years ago, when she'd bandaged it after a kitchen accident. Victor Chen looked up and met her eyes. And in that moment, she realized this stranger wasn't a stranger at all. Recognition hit them both like lightning, striking the same place twice. The past 7 years collapsed into nothing. The distance between a struggling waitress and a successful businessman suddenly meaningless compared to a single afternoon in 1972 when everything had been different. When they'd both been different. Victor Chen's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as he set down the final $100 bill, and Diane felt the Arizona heat outside press against the boutique's glass windows like a living thing, making the air-conditioned space feel smaller, more intimate, more impossible. Mrs. Whitmore snatched up the cash with practiced efficiency, her earlier cruelty now masked by professional courtesy. "I'll just ring this up. Miss Martinez, if you'll return to the fitting room, I'll have someone take your measurements for alterations." But Diane couldn't move. She stared at Victor Chen, older now, successful where he'd once been desperate, but still carrying that same careful dignity she remembered from the kitchen of Chen's Garden, the Chinese restaurant that used to sit on the corner of 3rd and Morrison before the fire. "Mr. Chen," she whispered, "I thought you left Arizona." "I did." His voice was quiet enough that Mrs. Whitmore couldn't hear from the register. "I came back 2 years ago. Started over." The blonde woman in tennis whites cleared her throat loudly, annoyed at being denied her entertainment. Victor's eyes flickered toward her with an expression that could freeze water, and she actually took a step back. Money recognized money, and apparently, his carried more weight than hers. "Miss Martinez," Victor said formally, though his eyes held warmth, "perhaps we might speak after you've completed your transaction. There's a coffee shop across the street. I believe we have much to discuss." Diane nodded, not trusting her voice. She retreated to the fitting room on shaking legs, carefully removing the ivory dress and replacing it with her waitress uniform, the pale blue polyester that smelled permanently of coffee and bacon grease no matter how many times she washed it. In the mirror, she looked exactly like what she was, a 24-year-old woman who'd been fighting so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to rest. Through the fitting room curtain, she heard Mrs. Whitmore's sugary voice. "Such a generous gesture, Mr. Chen. Are you a friend of the family?" Something like that. "And your business, if I may ask?" "Chen Technologies. We manufacture semiconductor components." The barely concealed surprise in Mrs. Whitmore's response made Diane's jaw clench. "Oh, I had no idea we had such distinguished clients in... Well, the dress will be ready in 2 weeks, Mr. Chen. Should I have it delivered to your office?" "No. Miss Martinez will collect it herself. And Mrs. Whitmore?" His voice dropped, became steel wrapped in silk. "I noticed your advertisement in the Phoenix Society magazine. My wife sits on the board of their charitable foundation. I'm sure she'd be very interested to hear about the exemplary customer service your boutique provides. To all your clients." The threat was delicate but unmistakable. Diane heard Mrs. Whitmore's sharp intake of breath, followed by a long pause. "Of course, Mr. Chen. We pride ourselves on treating every bride with equal respect." Diane emerged from the fitting room, and Mrs. Whitmore's smile was now genuine terror disguised as courtesy. "Miss Martinez, please accept my apologies for any misunderstanding. Your dress will receive our utmost attention." The tennis-white women had disappeared. Cowards always did when their cruelty faced consequences. Outside, the May heat slammed into them like opening an oven door. The sidewalk shimmered with it, and the air tasted like hot asphalt and creosote. Diane's second-hand Chevy Nova sat baking in the sun 3 blocks away, next to the Route 66 diner where her shift had ended 2 hours ago. The diner's neon sign, a winking cowboy with a coffee cup, flickered weakly in the bright afternoon. The coffee shop Victor led her to was called the Copper Cup, a tiny place wedged between a hardware store and a barber shop. Inside, it smelled like dark roast and cinnamon, with worn leather booths and a rotating fan that barely moved the hot air. They slid into a corner booth, and a teenage waitress brought water without being asked. Victor waited until she'd gone before speaking. "You remember." "The scar," Diane said. "You cut your hand on a broken rice bowl. I was washing dishes in your kitchen, trying to earn enough for Amy's doctor visit. She had an ear infection. You were 17. 19. Amy was 2. Victor's expression softened with memory and something like pain. "You wouldn't let me pay you extra. You said a fair day's wage was enough." It was. "My wife," his voice caught. "May was pregnant, 6 months. She went into labor early that night while I was at the restaurant. By the time I got to the hospital..." He stopped, collected himself. "She hemorrhaged. They saved the baby, but May was gone before morning." Diane reached across the table, covered his hand with hers, her calloused fingers against his steady ones. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I left Arizona a month after that." "I know. You left me a note. Said you'd found work in California." She had lied. She'd actually fled to her mother's house in Tucson after Amy's father's family had threatened to take Amy away, claiming Diane was unfit. The threat had been empty. They'd wanted nothing to do with their son's mistake, but the fear had been real enough to send her running. "I came back 6 months ago," Diane said quietly. "My mother passed. Amy wanted to come home." Victor nodded slowly. "The baby, my daughter Lily, She's 7 now. Healthy, bright, everything May would have wanted. But raising her alone. He met Diane's eyes. It taught me what you already knew, what strength it takes. What sacrifice. The curiosity gap widened between them. 7 years of separate suffering, parallel grief, and now this impossible collision in a bridal boutique. "Why were you there today?" Diane asked. "At Whitmore's?" Victor's expression shifted, became something unreadable. "I was looking for someone. A woman who once showed my family kindness when we had nothing. A woman who, according to my old restaurant accountant, recently moved back to Phoenix and was getting married." Diane's breath caught. "You were looking for me?" "I've been looking for you for 3 years." The coffee shop seemed to tilt sideways. "Why?" Victor pulled a worn envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. It was addressed to Diane Martinez, care of Chen's Garden, dated 1972. Inside was a check, yellowed with age, never cashed, for $5,000. "Because you saved more than you knew," Victor said quietly, "and I've been trying to repay the debt ever since." But before he could explain, the coffee shop door chimed, and a small voice called out, "Mama!" Diane turned to see Amy rushing toward her, pigtails flying, her face bright with urgency. And behind Amy, holding her hand with obvious concern, was a little Asian girl with serious eyes and her father's careful dignity. Victor Chen's daughter, Lily. The two children looked at each other, then at their parents, and Amy said the words that would unravel everything. "Mama, Miss Lily says you used to be her babysitter. Is that true?" The lie had lived so long, it almost felt like truth. For 7 years, Diane had convinced herself that leaving Phoenix meant leaving behind a chapter that was closed, finished, sealed away in memory, where it couldn't hurt anyone. But Amy's question hung in the copper-scented air of the coffee shop like smoke that wouldn't dissipate, and Diane felt the carefully constructed walls around that year begin to crumble. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. It just waits for the right moment to surface. And that moment was now. With 2 children staring at their parents and demanding answers adults had tried to avoid. Lily Chen had her mother's delicate features and her father's steady gaze. She couldn't have been more than a few weeks old the last time Diane had held her, but something in the child's serious expression tugged at memories Diane had locked away. Amy, by contrast, was all motion and energy, bouncing on her sneakers with barely contained excitement. "You two know each other?" Diane managed, though her throat felt tight. "We're in the same class at school," Amy announced proudly. "Miss Lily sits next to me. She's the best at math, and I let her use my colored pencils." Victor's expression was unreadable. "Lily, how did you find me?" "You said you had an errand on Main Street," Lily said in that precise way careful children speak. "And Amy saw you through the window when her mama didn't come home from the dress place. So we walked over together." She looked at Diane with sudden concern. "Did you get your dress, Miss Diane?" The formality of Miss Diane hit like a fist. This child didn't remember her. Of course she didn't. She'd been an infant. But Victor remembered, and from the way he was looking at Diane, she knew they'd run out of time to keep dancing around the truth. "Girls," Victor said gently, "why don't you sit at the counter? Order whatever you'd like. Ice cream sundaes, maybe?" The promise of ice cream worked magic on 7-year-olds and 5-year-olds alike. They scrambled toward the counter, already debating toppings in the way children do when the adult world temporarily releases them. Once they were out of earshot, Victor leaned forward. "You never cashed the check." "I couldn't." Diane's voice was barely above a whisper. It wasn't right. You cared for my daughter for 3 months. You moved into the apartment above the restaurant. You fed her, changed her, sang to her, stayed up through her colic while I tried to keep the business from collapsing. You were 19 years old with a baby of your own, working 2 jobs, and you still— His voice cracked. You still found time to love a stranger's child? The memory flooded back. Those desperate autumn months in 1972. Victor Chen, hollowed out by grief, trying to run a failing restaurant while caring for a newborn who screamed through the night. Diane, barely more than a child herself, understanding that particular species of drowning that comes from loving a baby while the world offers no help. She'd started washing dishes at Chen's garden to make rent, ended up living in the cramped studio apartment upstairs when Victor discovered she was sleeping in her car with Amy. And somewhere in the chaos of bottles and diapers and closing the restaurant at midnight, they'd formed a fragile ecosystem of mutual survival. You paid me, Diane said. You gave me a place to live. I paid you minimum wage. You gave me my daughter's life. Victor's hands were steady on the table, but his eyes were bright. The night you left, I came upstairs to find you'd cleaned the apartment, packed your things, and left a note saying you'd found better work in California. No forwarding address. No way to reach you. Just gone. I had to go. Why? Diane looked toward the counter where Amy and Lily were giggling over their sundaes, heads bent close together like they'd been friends forever instead of classmates for 2 months. Amy's father's family found out where we were. They showed up at the diner, started making threats about custody, about my unstable lifestyle. They saw me living above a restaurant with a baby, working all hours, and they twisted it into something ugly. She met Victor's eyes. I was terrified they'd follow through. So I ran. Did they? No. They never actually wanted Amy. They just wanted to hurt me for— She stopped. For existing, I guess. For being young and poor and in their way. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a bus rumbled past, belching diesel exhaust. A car honked. Life continued in its ordinary way while 2 people reckoned with the weight of old debts and older kindness. After you left, Victor said slowly, I hired a professional nanny. She quit after 2 weeks. I hired 3 more over the next year. None of them lasted. Lily cried constantly, wouldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The pediatrician said she was healthy, He paused. Just grieving. Babies can sense absence. She missed you. The words landed like stones in Diane's chest. Eventually, I sold the restaurant, used the money to start a small electronics repair shop. It grew. I worked hard, got lucky with some contracts, and 5 years later, I had enough capital to start Chen Technologies. We're not wealthy, but we're comfortable, stable. He pulled out another envelope, this one crisp and new. This is the original $5,000, adjusted for 7 years of compound interest. It's yours. It was always yours. Diane stared at the envelope. I can't take that. You already earned it. Victor, you saved my daughter's life, he said simply. Not dramatically, not in a single moment, but in 1,000 small ways over 3 months when I was too broken to see anything but my own grief. You made sure Lily knew she was loved, even when her father was barely functional. You sang to her. Amy's old lullabies. I'd hear you through the walls. You rocked her when I fell, asleep at the kitchen table. His voice broke. You were her mother when she didn't have one. At the counter, Lily laughed at something Amy said, and the sound carried across the coffee shop like bells. She doesn't remember me, Diane whispered. No, but I do. Victor pushed the envelope closer. And I've spent 7 years wanting to say thank you. So please, let me. Diane's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. Inside wasn't just a check. There was a photograph. Faded, slightly creased. It showed a young woman with exhausted eyes and a soft smile, holding 2 babies, one in each arm. Amy on the left, Lily on the right, both sleeping peacefully. You took this? The only one I have from that year. I kept it to remember that even in the worst darkness, there was light. Victor's expression was tender and sad. You were that light, Diane. For both of us. The coffee shop seemed to hold its breath, and then Amy was tugging at Diane's sleeve, her face smudged with chocolate, her voice urgent. Mama, Miss Lily says her daddy's been looking for you forever because you helped them when they were sad. Is that why the man bought your dress? Because you're a hero? From the mouths of children came truths adults spent years avoiding. But before Diane could answer, the coffee shop door opened, and a woman's voice cut through the moment like glass shattering. Victor, what the hell are you doing with her? A woman stood in the doorway, perfectly coiffed, dripping with jewelry, her face twisted with an ugly mixture of shock and fury. Victor's expression went carefully blank. Patricia, what are you doing here? Following you, apparently, since you've been lying about your business meetings for weeks. Patricia's eyes landed on Diane, raking over her waitress uniform with unconcealed contempt. Is this her? Is this the little charity case you've been obsessing over? And just like that, Diane understood. Victor Chen was engaged to be married, and his fiancée had no intention of letting the past interfere with her plans. Patricia Drummond wore her wealth like armor, every diamond and designer label a declaration of territory. She swept into the copper cup with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, her heels clicking against the linoleum like a countdown to detonation. The air around her smelled of expensive perfume, something French and suffocating, and her blonde hair was styled in the kind of perfect waves that required weekly salon appointments. This was a woman who viewed the world as a hierarchy, and she'd spent 38 years ensuring she stayed near the top. For Diane, still wearing her coffee-stained uniform and discount store shoes, the contrast felt like a spotlight exposing every inadequacy she'd ever felt. Victor, I asked you a question. Patricia's voice could have etched glass. Who is this woman, and why are you buying her wedding dresses? Lily slid off her counter stool and moved instinctively toward her father, her small face troubled. Amy, sensing danger the way children do, pressed closer to Diane. The teenage waitress suddenly found urgent business in the back room. Victor stood slowly, placing himself between Patricia and the children. This is Diane Martinez, an old friend, and I'd appreciate it if you'd lower your voice. You're frightening the girls. Old friend? Patricia's laugh was sharp enough to cut. Victor, darling, you don't have old friends. You have business associates and charity cases. Which is she? The cruelty in that question made Diane's stomach turn. But before she could respond, Victor's voice went cold in a way she'd never heard before. Diane is the woman who cared for my daughter when May died, who kept Lily alive and loved during the worst months of my life, who asked for nothing and gave everything. He paused, letting each word land with precision. So yes, Patricia, she's a friend, the kind who actually matters. Patricia's perfectly made-up face flushed red. You never mentioned her. You never asked about that time. Because you said you didn't want to discuss it. Patricia's composure was cracking, revealing something ugly beneath. You said the past was painful, and we should focus on our future. Our wedding is in 3 months, Victor. 3 months, and I find you in some dive coffee shop with With the woman you owe your entire relationship to, Diane interrupted quietly. Her voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. Because if Victor's daughter hadn't survived those months, if she hadn't been cared for and loved, he wouldn't be the man you're marrying. So maybe show some gratitude instead of jealousy. The coffee shop went silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Who do you think you're talking to? Someone who clearly doesn't understand the value of kindness, Diane replied. She stood, gathering her purse, reaching for Amy's hand. Thank you for the dress, Victor. But I can't accept your money. It wouldn't be right. Not with... She glanced at Patricia. Not with complications. Diane, wait. But she was already moving toward the door, Amy's hand clasped in hers, trying to escape before the tears threatening behind her eyes could fall. They made it exactly 3 steps before Lily's voice stopped them cold. Please don't go. The little girl had moved away from her father, standing alone in the center of the coffee shop with tears streaming down her serious face. Please don't leave again, Miss Diane. Daddy's been sad for so long, and I thought when we found you, he'd be happy again. The words hit like a physical blow. Victor knelt beside his daughter, his own composure finally breaking. Lily, sweetheart. You keep her picture, Lily said through tears. The one with the 2 babies. You look at it when you think I'm sleeping. And you told Uncle James that you'd made a terrible mistake letting Miss Diane disappear without saying thank you properly. She turned to Diane, her face devastated. Please don't leave Amy. She's my best friend. Amy looked up at Diane with huge eyes. Mama, can we stay? Just for a little bit? How do you explain adult complications to a 5-year-old? How do you tell your daughter that sometimes kindness gets punished? That standing in another woman's territory, even accidentally, makes you the villain? But before Diane could answer, Patricia spoke again, her voice now controlled and deadly calm. How much? Everyone turned to look at her. Excuse me, Victor said. How much money will it take for you to leave? Patricia addressed Diane directly, pulling out a checkbook from her Gucci purse. 10,000? 20? Name your price. Clearly you need it, given your... She gestured at Diane's uniform. Circumstances. The insult was calculated and precise. Diane felt Amy's hand tighten in hers. My circumstances, Diane said slowly, are none of your business, and I don't want your money. Everyone wants money, especially people like you. People like you. The phrase hung in the air like poison gas. Victor stood, and his expression had gone from cold to frozen. Patricia, that's enough. No, Victor, it's not nearly enough. Patricia's mask had fully slipped now, revealing the entitled cruelty beneath. You've been obsessed with finding this woman for years. You've spent thousands on private investigators. You've turned down business opportunities because you were too busy chasing ghosts. And now that you've found her, what? You're just going to throw away everything we've built for some waitress who once babysat your kid? Get out, Victor said quietly. What? Get out of this coffee shop. Get out of my life. Get out before I say things we'll both regret. His voice was controlled, but barely. The engagement is over, Patricia. It's been over for months. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. Patricia's face went white, then red, then white again. You're choosing her over me? Over everything I've given you? You haven't given me anything except appearances and social connections. Victor's voice was sad now, tired. Diane gave me hope when I had none. She gave my daughter love when she desperately needed it. She asked for nothing. You demand everything and offer nothing real in return." For a moment, Patricia just stood there, trembling with fury. Then she turned to Diane with a look of pure venom. "This isn't over," she said softly. "I know people, important people, people who don't like it when gold-digging little nobodies try to steal what belongs to others." She smiled, sharp and cruel. "You think you've won? You haven't. I'll make sure of it." She swept out of the coffee shop, leaving behind the cloying scent of her perfume and a silence that felt like the aftermath of an explosion. Lily was still crying. Amy looked confused and scared. Victor stood like a man who'd just burned down his entire future and wasn't sure whether to feel relief or terror. And Diane realized that accepting his help 7 years ago had been simple compared to what came next. Because Patricia Drummond didn't make empty threats. And the real battle hadn't even begun. 3 days after the Copper Cup confrontation, Diane's world began to systematically collapse. It started small, a missed shift at the diner because her manager suddenly couldn't find her on the schedule, despite having confirmed her hours the day before. Then the landlord of her tiny apartment called to say he'd received a concerning report about unauthorized occupants and needed to reevaluate her lease. By Wednesday afternoon, when Amy's school principal requested an urgent meeting about her daughter's attendance record, a record that was flawless, Diane understood with cold certainty that Patricia Drummond kept her promises. When powerful people decide to crush you, they don't attack head-on. They dismantle your life piece by careful piece until you have nothing left to stand on. The principal's office smelled like old wood polish and stale coffee, a scent that immediately transported Diane back to her own childhood disciplinary meetings. Mrs. Henderson sat behind her desk with the uncomfortable expression of someone delivering bad news she didn't fully understand. "Miss Martinez, we've received several anonymous reports expressing concern about Amy's home situation." She shuffled papers without looking at Diane directly. "Questions about supervision, stability, appropriate living conditions." Diane's hands clenched in her lap. "Amy is well cared for. She's never missed school. Her grades are excellent. Who made these reports?" "The calls were anonymous, but they came through the district's child welfare hotline, which means we're legally obligated to investigate." Mrs. Henderson finally met her eyes, and there was sympathy there, but also bureaucratic helplessness. "A social worker will be contacting you within the week for a home visit." The room tilted slightly. A home visit. It's standard procedure. I'm sure everything will be fine. But they both knew it wouldn't be fine, because even innocent people could be destroyed by investigations, by questions, by the simple act of being examined under a microscope, by authorities looking for problems. Diane left the school in a daze, picked up Amy from her classroom, where Lily waved sadly, both girls understanding something was wrong even if they couldn't name it, and drove home through the Phoenix heat. The Chevy Nova's air conditioning had died the previous summer, and sweat ran down her back as she navigated familiar streets that suddenly felt hostile. Their apartment was a studio in a converted motel, the kind of place that catered to people one paycheck from homelessness. But it was clean, safe, and hers. Amy's drawings covered one wall, cheerful crayon pictures of horses and flowers, and a recurring image of a bride in a white dress. The dress Diane was supposed to pick up in 11 days. The dress she could no longer afford to alter, given that her work hours had mysteriously evaporated. That evening, after putting Amy to bed with reassurances she didn't believe, Diane sat at their tiny kitchen table and counted her savings. $312, enough for one more month's rent, or food, or the utility bills that were somehow suddenly overdue despite being paid on time. Not enough for all three. The knock on the door came at 9 o'clock, soft but insistent. Victor Chen stood in the hallway holding a paper bag that smelled like Chinese takeout, his expression cautious. "I thought you might not have eaten. How did you find my address?" "Lily gave it to me. Amy wrote it down for her." He held up the bag. "May I come in? Just to talk. Nothing more?" Diane should have said no, should have protected herself and Amy from further entanglement in a situation that was already destroying them. But she was tired, so profoundly tired. And the smell of food made her realize she'd forgotten to eat anything since breakfast. She stepped aside. They sat at the small table, and Victor unpacked containers of lo mein, kung pao chicken, and egg rolls. Simple food, but it tasted like memory and comfort. He didn't speak while she ate, just waited with the patience of someone who understood hunger in all its forms. "Patricia's been busy," Diane finally said. "I know. I've been trying to stop it." Victor's expression was grim. She has connections throughout Phoenix's social infrastructure. Country club friends, charity board members, people who owe her favors. I've called in every favor I have. But your favors don't outweigh hers. Not yet. He paused. "Diane, let me help you. Properly. I have resources, lawyers who can... And make it look like exactly what Patricia's claiming? That I'm some gold digger who seduced you for money?" Diane shook her head. "The moment you start defending me publicly, she wins. Because then everyone believes her story. So what do we do?" "We?" Diane met his eyes. "Victor, there is no we. You barely know me. I was your employee for 3 months 7 years ago. You don't owe me anything, certainly not enough to let Patricia destroy your reputation along with mine." "You're wrong." Victor's voice was quiet but absolute. "I know exactly who you are. You're the person who sang Blackbird to my daughter when she couldn't sleep, who mixed formula at 3 in the morning and never complained, who stayed even when you didn't have to." He reached across the table, covered her hand with his. "You're the person I've measured everyone against for 7 years, and no one has ever come close." The confession hung between them like something fragile and dangerous. "Victor, I ended my engagement to Patricia before I saw you in that boutique," he continued. "I'd been planning to for months. She was cruel to Lily, dismissive of anything that didn't serve her ambitions. Finding you just gave me the courage to finally do what I should have done a year ago." Diane stared at their joined hands, his steady and strong, hers rough and trembling. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to know that whatever happens next, it's not your fault. Patricia was always going to lash out when she lost control. You're just the convenient target." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "But I won't let her hurt you or Amy. I promise. You can't stop her. Watch me." The certainty in his voice almost made her believe it. They sat in the small apartment's kitchen until nearly midnight, talking about the years between 1972 and now. Victor told her about building his company from nothing, about the loneliness of success without someone to share it. Diane told him about the string of dead-end jobs, about the men who'd promised stability and delivered disappointment, about learning to depend on no one but herself. And slowly, in the sharing of small truths, something shifted between them. Not romance. They were both too damaged and cautious for that. But recognition. Two people who'd survived alone realizing they didn't have to anymore. At midnight, Victor left with a promise to return the next day. But when Diane woke at 6 in the morning to Amy's frightened voice, she found an envelope that had been slipped under the door during the night. Inside was a single photograph: Victor and Diane at the copper cup, heads bent close together, hands joined across the table, and a note in elegant script: "Proof of an affair is just the beginning. Withdraw from the wedding or lose everything, including your daughter." Patricia Drummond had drawn first blood, and the war had just begun. The photograph in Diane's trembling hands wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon aimed directly at everything she'd built for Amy. A single anonymous call to Child Protective Services claiming an affair with a wealthy married man would be enough to trigger a custody investigation that could drag on for months. Even if Diane won, even if the truth eventually emerged, the damage would be permanent. Amy would be questioned by strangers, examined by psychologists, possibly placed in temporary foster care, while the system ground through its bureaucratic processes. Patricia understood exactly where to strike, not at Diane's pride or reputation, but at the one thing that would break her completely. And as the morning sun climbed over Phoenix, turning the apartment's single window into a square of blinding light, Diane realized she'd run out of options except one: surrender. She called Victor at 7 in the morning, before she could change her mind. "Don't come back," she said when he answered. "Don't contact me again. Tell Lily that Amy had to move away for school. Tell her anything but the truth." "Diane, what happened?" "What always happens when people like us forget our place." Her voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I'll return the dress. I'll disappear. Just keep your daughter safe from this." "I'm coming over." "Victor, no." But he'd already hung up. He arrived 20 minutes later with Lily in tow, both of them still in pajamas. The little girl's hair was uncombed, and Victor's shirt was buttoned wrong, signs of hasty departure that in any other circumstances would have been endearing. But Amy was still sleeping, and Diane met them at the door with the photograph already extended. Victor studied it with an expression that shifted from confusion to cold fury. "Where did you get this?" "Under my door. This morning." Diane's voice was flat, exhausted. "She's going to claim we're having an affair, that I'm an unfit mother, that Amy should be taken into state custody for her own protection." Lily's eyes went wide. "Take Amy away? Why would anyone do that?" "Because some people hurt others when they don't get what they want," Victor said, kneeling to his daughter's level. His voice was gentle but honest. "And right now, someone is trying to hurt Miss Diane and Amy because they're angry at me. That's not fair." "No, sweetheart, it's not." Diane watched this exchange with her heart breaking. 7 years old, and Lily was already learning that the world could be cruel for no reason, that wealth and power could crush kindness without consequence. "I have an idea," Victor said, standing, "but it requires trust. Complete trust." "What kind of idea?" "The kind that turns Patricia's weapon against her." He pulled out his phone, scrolled through contacts. "My company's head of security is former FBI. He specializes in corporate espionage and blackmail cases. If Patricia's been this aggressive with you, she's left a trail, communications, payments to whoever took that photograph, connections to your landlord and employer. Even if you prove she's behind it, so what?" Diane said bitterly. "She'll claim she was protecting you from a gold digger. The court of public opinion will side with the wealthy socialite over the struggling single mother every time. Not if we have proof of her pattern." Victor was already texting. "Patricia has done this before. 2 other women she perceived as threats. An ex-girlfriend of mine from college, a female business partner I worked with briefly. She destroys anyone who challenges her control. But if we document this behavior, show it's not about protecting me, but about her own pathological jealousy, that still doesn't protect Amy in the short term. Victor met her eyes. So we remove Amy from the equation entirely. The suggestion landed like a stone in deep water. What do you mean? Lily and I are flying to San Diego this afternoon for a technology conference. 3 days, already scheduled. He paused. Bring Amy with us. As far as anyone knows, the girls are having a play date that extended into a small vacation. No courts, no investigations, no opportunities for Patricia to make her move while we're building our case. That's running away. That's buying time. Victor's expression was fierce. Diane, I will not let that woman hurt your daughter. I don't care what it costs me. Money, reputation, business connections. I will burn down everything I've built before I let her win. The intensity in his voice stole Diane's breath. This wasn't the grieving widower she'd known 7 years ago, or even the careful businessman who'd walked into Whitmore's bridal boutique. This was a man who'd found his line in the sand and was willing to defend it. Why? She whispered. Why are you doing this? Because 7 years ago, you didn't hesitate to help a stranger in crisis. You gave me grace when I deserved none, patience when I had nothing to offer in return. You loved my daughter when she was just another mouth to feed in a life already too hard. His voice softened. Because kindness like that is so rare it's worth protecting. And because he stopped, seemed to gather courage. Because the moment I saw you in that boutique, being mocked for wanting one beautiful thing in a hard life, I knew I'd spent 7 years looking for the wrong kind of future. The confession hung between them like dawn breaking. Amy appeared in the doorway, sleepy and confused, holding her stuffed rabbit. Mama, why is everybody here so early? Lily rushed to her, taking her hand. We're going on an adventure to San Diego. There's a zoo with pandas and a beach where the waves are really big and… Lily, sweetheart, we need to ask first. Victor's gentle correction didn't diminish his daughter's enthusiasm. Both girls turned pleading eyes toward Diane. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that the world is trying to take her away? That going on vacation might be the only thing standing between her and the foster system. You don't. You just hold her close and make the decision that gives her one more day of innocence. Pack your favorite things, Diane told Amy softly. We're going to see the ocean. But as Victor made calls to arrange flights and Lily helped Amy choose which stuffed animals to bring, Diane noticed something she'd missed in her panic. The photograph showed her and Victor at the coffee shop, but the angle was wrong. Too high, too distant to be from another customer's phone. This was taken from outside, through the window, by someone using professional equipment, which meant Patricia had hired someone to follow Victor, which meant she'd been planning this attack for days, maybe weeks, and which meant that whatever trap they were walking into, Patricia had already anticipated their moves. Diane opened her mouth to warn Victor, but a loud knock on the door froze everyone in place. A woman's voice called through the wood, official and implacable. Miss Martinez? This is Sandra Ortiz with Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you about your daughter. Please open the door. The trap had sprung, and they were already caught inside. Diane's hand froze on the doorknob like a bird caught mid-flight. Sandra Ortiz's voice came again through the wood, patient but implacable, the tone of someone who'd done this 100 times before and knew exactly how it would unfold. Miss Martinez, I know you're home. Your car is in the parking lot. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. For a single suspended moment, Everyone in the apartment held their breath. Two children clutching stuffed animals, a mother weighing impossible choices, and a man calculating how quickly everything could fall apart. Then Victor Chen did something that changed the entire equation. He opened the door himself. Sandra Ortiz was a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and the tired expression of someone who'd seen too much suffering. She wore sensible shoes and carried a leather portfolio that probably contained forms capable of destroying families with a single signature. Her gaze swept the apartment, taking in Victor, the children, the breakfast dishes still on the table, the packed bags by the door. "Mr. Chen?" she said with surprise. "I didn't expect to find you here." "You know him?" Diane managed. "Chen Technologies donated the new computer system to our office last year. Mr. Chen personally oversaw the installation." Sandra's expression shifted to confusion. "I'm here about an anonymous report concerning Amy Martinez. Claims of neglect, inappropriate supervision, unstable living conditions. But clearly," she looked around the clean, if cramped, apartment. "Clearly something doesn't add up." "Because it's a lie," Victor said firmly. "Diane is an exceptional mother. Amy is healthy, happy, and thriving. This report is retaliation from my former fiancée, who's trying to hurt me by targeting innocent people." Sandra's eyes sharpened with understanding. "Patricia Drummond filed this report. You know her too? She's on the board of directors for Family Services of Arizona." Sandra's mouth tightened. This is the third anonymous complaint she's filed in the past 2 years. The other two were also against women connected to men she was involved with. Both cases were dismissed as unfounded, but not before causing significant trauma to the families involved. The revelation hung in the air like lightning about to strike. "You're saying this is a pattern?" Diane asked, hope flickering dangerously in her chest. "I'm saying I have concerns about the motivation behind this report," Sandra said carefully. "But I'm still legally obligated to conduct a home visit and interview. May I come in?" They spent the next 40 minutes in what felt like the longest examination of Diane's life. Sandra checked the apartment's safety features, inspected the refrigerator's contents, reviewed Amy's school records and medical history. She asked Amy gentle questions about her daily routine, her favorite things, whether she ever felt scared at home. Amy, bless her, was honest and enthusiastic. "Mama works really hard so we can have nice things. She makes the best pancakes, and she always reads to me before bed, and she promised I could take swimming lessons this summer." "Do you ever feel unsafe?" Sandra asked. "Only when the thunder gets really loud. But Mama lets me sleep in her bed then, so it's okay." Through it all, Victor sat quietly with Lily, the two of them providing silent support. Diane watched him with her daughter, noting how naturally he listened to her chatter, how he treated her explanations about her stuffed animals with genuine interest. This was a man who understood that children deserved respect, not just indulgence. Sandra was just closing her portfolio, her expression softening toward something like an apology when another knock rattled the door. This time, no one asked permission. The door swung open, and Patricia Drummond swept in like an avenging angel, her face flushed with triumph. "Sandra, thank God you're here. I came as soon as I heard you'd opened a case." She didn't even glance at Diane, her attention laser-focused on the social worker. "As a board member, I wanted to personally ensure that this child's welfare is being—" She stopped dead when she saw Victor. "What are you doing here?" Her voice went sharp. "You're supposed to be at your office. I called your secretary." "I don't answer to you anymore, Patricia. And I certainly don't need your permission to visit friends." "Friends." Patricia's laugh was razor-edged. Is that what we're calling it? Sandra, you should know that Victor has been having an affair with this woman. I have photographs, evidence of two people having coffee, Sandra interrupted. Because that's all the photograph shows. Ms. Drummond, I'm going to ask you to leave. Excuse me? You have no legal standing in this case. Your presence is inappropriate and, frankly, concerning. Sandra's professional courtesy had evaporated. This is the third time you've filed what appears to be a retaliatory complaint against women connected to your personal life. If you continue, I'll have no choice but to report this pattern to the state licensing board. Patricia's face went white, then crimson. How dare you? I donate thousands to your organization. I've served on your board for 5 years. And used your position to weaponize the child welfare system against innocent people. Sandra's voice was cold now. That ends today. I'm dismissing this case as unfounded and recommending that any future complaints from you be flagged for additional scrutiny before action is taken. For a moment, Patricia just stood there, trembling with rage. Then her eyes landed on Diane, and something ugly and desperate surfaced. You think you've won? She hissed. You think because you've manipulated Victor and fooled this social worker that everything's fine? I know people everywhere in this city. I'll make sure you never work again. I'll make sure. You'll make sure of nothing. The new voice came from the doorway, where a tall black man in an expensive suit stood holding a manila envelope. Ms. Drummond, I'm James Reeves, head of security for Chen Technologies. I've been investigating your activities for the past 72 hours. Victor stood, recognition and relief flooding his face. James, you found something. Everything. James opened the envelope, pulled out a stack of documents. Bank records showing payments to a private investigator who's been following Mr. Chen for 6 weeks. Phone logs connecting you to Miss Martinez's landlord, her employer, and the school principal, all contacted within hours of each other with identical complaints. And he pulled out another photograph. This image of you meeting with known tabloid journalist Derek Morrison, along with a contract paying him $10,000 to run a story about Mr. Chen's affair with a gold-digging single mother. Patricia's face had gone from red to ashen. You hired someone to destroy my reputation? Victor's voice was quiet, but underneath was something molten. To traumatize a 5-year-old child? To potentially have her taken from her mother? I was protecting you! Patricia's composure shattered completely. From her, from the past, from making a mistake that would ruin everything we'd built. We built nothing, Victor said. You wanted access to my money and social standing. I wanted... He stopped, looked at Diane. I wanted someone to care about what actually matters. And I finally found her. The confession hung in the apartment's stale air. Sandra cleared her throat. Ms. Drummond, I strongly suggest you leave before I call the police. Mr. Reeves, I'll need copies of that evidence for my own report. Already prepared, ma'am. Patricia looked around the small apartment, at Sandra's disapproving face, at James Reeves's incriminating evidence, at Victor's cold fury, at Diane standing straight and proud in her waitress uniform, at 2 little girls holding hands, watching the adult world reveal its ugliness. This isn't over, she said, but the threat was hollow now, the words of someone who'd already lost. Yes, Victor said quietly. It is. Patricia left without another word, her expensive heels clicking down the hallway like a countdown that had finally reached 0. The silence she left behind felt like breathing after drowning. Sandra finished her paperwork quickly, apologizing again for the intrusion. James gave Diane his card, promised that if Patricia made any further moves, he'd have legal recourse prepared within hours. They all left, and finally, it was just the four of them again. 2 adults and 2 children in a cramped apartment, processing what had just happened. "Is the mean lady gone forever?" Amy asked in a small voice. "Forever," Victor confirmed. Lily hugged Amy tight. "We're still going to San Diego though, right? For fun this time, not for hiding?" Diane looked at Victor, saw in his eyes everything that had been building between them for 7 years, compressed into 7 impossible days. "Do we still need to run?" "No," he said softly, "but we could still go. If you wanted." Amy and Lily erupted in cheers, already planning their beach adventure with the resilience of children who process trauma by returning to joy as quickly as possible. But Diane was stuck on something else Victor had said to Patricia. "I finally found her." "Victor," she said quietly, "what did you mean when you said—" He crossed the small space between them, took her hands in his. "I meant that I've been looking for you since the day you left. Not just to say thank you, but because those 3 months with you were the only time since May's death that I remembered what it felt like to not be alone. You made my house feel like a home. You made survival feel like living." That was 7 years ago. We were different people. Were we? Or were we just 2 people too damaged to see what was right in front of us? His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. But Diane, I need you to know, the dress I bought wasn't just about repaying a debt. It was about hoping that maybe if I found you again, we could both stop running." Behind them, Amy giggled at something Lily whispered, the sound of children who still believed the world could be kind. "I'm still getting married in 11 days, Diane said. Her voice shook. "To Richard, the accountant. He's nice, stable, exactly what Amy needs." "Do you love him?" The question hung between them like a bridge or a chasm, depending on how she answered. "I love what he represents. Security, normalcy, a father figure for Amy." "That's not what I asked." Diane closed her eyes. "No, I don't love him." "Then don't marry him." She opened her eyes, met Victor's steady gaze. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking for a chance. Not forever, not right now, but a chance to see if what we both felt 7 years ago was real. If it could grow into something that matters." He smiled, sad and hopeful. "I'm asking you to come to San Diego, to spend 3 days getting to know each other as people, not as survivor and savior. And then, if you still want to marry Richard, I'll stand aside." "But Diane," his voice dropped to a whisper, "don't marry him because you're afraid to want more." Amy tugged on Diane's sleeve. "Mama, can we go, please?" And Diane realized that for the first time in her adult life she had a choice. Not between survival and suffering, but between safety and joy. She looked at her daughter's hopeful face, at Lily's excited grin, at Victor's patient eyes. "Pack your bags," she said. "We're going to see the ocean." But as they gathered their things and headed toward Victor's car, none of them noticed the figure watching from across the parking lot. A woman with a camera and a phone, already dialing a number. Patricia Drummond had lost the battle, but she'd made one final call that would change everything. 3 weeks later, Diane Martinez stood in front of the mirror at Whitmore's bridal boutique, wearing the ivory dress that had started everything. But this time, the laughter wasn't mocking. It was joyful, coming from Amy and Lily as they spun in matching flower girl dresses, their giggles echoing off the mirrored walls like bells. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore hovered nearby with pins and measuring tape. her obsequious courtesy now genuine terror, barely disguised as professionalism. Victor Chen had made it abundantly clear that his wife's foundation donations would be contingent on exemplary service to all clients, and Eleanor Whitmore was nothing if not a survivor who knew which way the wind blew. For Diane, standing in this dress felt less like triumph and more like coming home to herself, the version of herself she'd been too afraid to become. The San Diego trip had changed everything and nothing. They'd spent 3 days at the beach, building sandcastles and searching for shells, eating fish tacos from beachside stands, and watching the sunset paint the Pacific in colors that seemed impossible. Victor had been patient, never pushing, just present in the way that matters most. The girls had bonded like sisters, finishing each other's sentences and creating elaborate imaginary worlds where pandas could fly and mermaids guarded treasure. And on the second night, after the children were asleep in their hotel room, Diane and Victor had sat on the balcony overlooking the ocean and finally talked about everything they'd been too scared to say. "I called off the wedding to Richard," she'd told him, "before we left Phoenix. He was relieved, actually. Said he'd known for months that I was marrying him for the wrong reasons." "How did he know?" "Because I never looked at him the way I look at you." The confession had hung between them like a bridge finally completed. Victor had taken her hand, pressed it to his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. "I spent 7 years thinking I was looking for you to say thank you. But the truth is, I was looking for you because you were the only person who ever made me want to try again. To believe that loss doesn't have to be permanent." They hadn't kissed that night, hadn't made promises they weren't ready to keep, but they'd sat together until dawn, watching the waves roll in, and Diane had felt something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope without conditions attached. The morning after they returned to Phoenix, everything Patricia had carefully constructed collapsed like a house of cards in a windstorm. The phone call she'd made from the parking lot had been to Derek Morrison, the tabloid journalist she'd paid to write the exposé about Victor's affair. But Derek had his own moral lines, thin though they were, and when James Reeves had approached him with evidence of Patricia's systematic harassment and offered him a better story, "Socialite uses charity board, positioned to terrorize single mothers," he'd taken it. The article ran in Phoenix's largest newspaper, complete with interviews from the 2 other women Patricia had targeted, documentation of her abuse of power, and a scathing editorial about how the wealthy weaponized social services against the vulnerable. Patricia Drummond resigned from every board position within 48 hours. Her reputation in Phoenix society, the thing she'd valued above all else, was demolished beyond repair. Victor's security chief had documented everything carefully enough that criminal charges for harassment and filing false reports were being considered by the district attorney. But the real justice came quieter, more personal. "Miss Diane?" Amy's voice pulled her back to the present. "You look like a princess." Diane studied her reflection. The dress had been altered perfectly, fitted to her body like it had been made for her all along. Her calloused hands, still rough from work, because she'd returned to the diner at her own insistence, no longer looked out of place against the silk. They looked like what they were: evidence of strength, survival, and the kind of love that shows up in action rather than words. "What do you think?" she asked Victor, who stood near the boutique entrance with the careful distance of a man who understood that some moments belonged to women alone. "I think," he said softly, "that you were always beautiful. The dress just helps everyone else see it." Mrs. Whitmore cleared her throat delicately. "The seamstress asks if you'd like the hem raised a 1/4 inch. For the shoes you'll be wearing?" The ceremony is outdoors, Diane said. On grass. The hem is perfect as it is. Because she wasn't marrying Richard at the country club he'd reserved. She wasn't marrying anyone. Not yet. But she was having a celebration anyway. A party for Amy's 6th birthday, to be held in Victor's backyard, where she'd formally introduce their combined families to each other and the community. Where she'd wear this dress not as a bride, but as a woman who'd learned that sometimes the greatest courage is choosing joy over safety. Victor had insisted on paying for everything, and this time, Diane had let him. Not because she needed his money, but because she was learning that accepting help wasn't the same as being rescued, that interdependence was stronger than independence forged in trauma. "We're ready," Diane told Mrs. Whitmore, and they began the process of carefully removing the dress. As she changed back into her jeans and work shirt, she overheard Lily and Amy in the corner, heads bent over a piece of paper. "What are you girls working on?" "We're making a list," Lily announced seriously, "of all the things we're going to do when we're sisters. When you're—" Diane stopped, looked at Victor. He shrugged, but his eyes were smiling. "I told Lily we're taking things slow." She interpreted that as definitely happening, just not today. "Is she wrong?" Diane asked quietly. Victor crossed the boutique, took her hands in his. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know that for the first time in 7 years, I'm excited to find out. And I know that whatever happens, I want you and Amy in it, in whatever form makes sense. Friends, family, something more. As long as you're there." Amy appeared at Diane's side, tugging her shirt. "Mama, if Mr. Victor becomes my daddy someday, does that mean Lily's officially my sister?" The question was so pure, so hopeful, that Diane felt tears threaten. "Let's start with best friends," she managed, "and see where it goes from there." "But you like him, right? Like him?" Victor laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Even the 5-year-olds can tell." Diane looked at him, this man who'd found her twice, who'd fought for her without being asked, who'd shown her that kindness could exist without expectation of return, who'd given her daughters friendship, protection, and the radical gift of being treated as if they mattered. "Yeah," she said softly. "I like him." Amy and Lily cheered like she'd just announced Christmas was coming early. And as they left Whitmore's bridal boutique for the last time, the ivory dress carefully wrapped in tissue paper and carried like the treasure it was, Diane realized that the dress had never been the point. The point was choosing to believe she deserved beautiful things, to believe that single mothers could have more than survival, to believe that the hard years hadn't made her unworthy of joy. They'd made her strong enough to recognize it when it arrived. That evening, she and Victor sat on his back porch while the girls played in the yard, catching fireflies in mason jars and shrieking with delight. The Arizona sky was painted in purples and golds, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. "What are you thinking?" Victor asked. "That 7 years ago, I ran away because I was scared. And 3 weeks ago, I almost made the same mistake." Diane leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "But you taught me something important. That running and leaving aren't always the same thing. That sometimes staying is the bravest choice." Victor pressed a kiss to her temple. "You taught me that first. When you stayed with Lily when you had every reason to leave." They sat in comfortable silence while the sky darkened and the fireflies began their nightly dance. Amy and Lily had given up capturing them, content now to just watch the lights float through the gathering dark like tiny stars that had fallen close enough to touch. The ivory dress hung in Diane's closet, waiting not for a wedding that might never come, but for the right moment to be worn in celebration of whatever came next. And that, Diane thought, was the real miracle. Not rescue or romance or reversal of fortune, just the quiet, radical act of a woman deciding she deserved a beautiful dress and meaning it. People say that on certain Phoenix evenings, you can still see a woman in an ivory dress standing in Whitmore's window, a ghost or a memory, depending on who's telling the story, watching the street as if waiting for something that never came, or perhaps for something that finally did. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories of ordinary people choosing extraordinary courage. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone show you unexpected kindness when you needed it most? I read every single one. Until next time, remember, the dress you deserve isn't the one someone else thinks you should wear. It's the one that makes you feel like yourself.